this morning with the penultimate segment of this morning's edition of News and Views, and we are now focusing on the fourth international conference on Islamic civilization in Southern Africa. Shortly, we'll be joined by the founding CEO of Awqaf South Africa, Zeinoul Abedien Cajee. But what is interesting is this conference is a representation of our beloved Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as depicted in African Islamic scholarship and literature, and a number of panel themes and papers, and really taking place next week from the 12th to the 14th of September in Cape Town at the Kirstenbush Gardens Conference Center. But also when we're talking about the legacy of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and it is the month of Rabiul Awal, so it's an opportune time for a conference of this nature to take place, and it covers a whole host and a variety of themes and topics. Zeinoul Abedien Cajee, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Inayat, and Jazakallah for having me on your wonderful show once again.
Shukran. Yes, Jazakallah to you for taking time out. And, when you sent me a whole brief, as far as this conference is concerned, it actually piqued my interest. And as I mentioned, appropriately taking place in the month of Rabiul Awal, very, very significant. But more importantly, this whole representation of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam with various themes, and also in terms of his legacy. So, it's going to be quite an intense conference from what I've seen from on the program schedule as well. But I suppose, let's just try and understand just some background, some thinking behind hosting this conference with this particular theme in mind.
Okay, so if one looks at the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and his history, we look at it from his birth. His birth and up to now is now 1500 years. So one of the considerations was that this is also, as you mentioned, Rabiul Awal, the month of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and it also happens to be his 1500th birthday since he was born, of course. So having said that, the important thing is about what was his impact in Africa. And that's the focal point. The focal point is the impact of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his representation in various facets, whether it be in governance, in leadership, in political legacy, business, economics, education, oral tradition, songs and poetry, Maulud, historical and literary scholarship. These are all different themes and different subsections of what this conference is going to be discussing. And, we have scholars from all over Africa and even beyond Africa that will be presenting. So the aspect about the representation of the Prophet in all these sectors is quite significant, and also that it's also in commemoration of the 1500 years of the prophetic legacy, inshallah.
Well, certainly, and also I think from what you are saying and talking about this prophetic legacy and focusing on the African continent in particular, and what for me is relevant is Islam came to Africa before even it reached Medina. And that was from with the first hijrah that had taken place when they sought a refuge and they came through. So Islam came to Africa first. And that for me is extremely relevant. And also, taking a look at the whole host of scholars. And these are scholars of note. And we don't sometimes appreciate or realize the gems in terms of scholarship in providing us with information, in providing us with education as far as the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ and what he actually means to the people on the African continent, Zeinoul.
Yeah. So one of the things, you can call this also a decolonization project, because what we find is that a lot of our history, a lot of our readings come from the West, come from Orientalists, come from Islamophobic sectors. And what we need to do is to create and encourage our own indigenous knowledge systems. So we try to encourage local scholars, scholars in Africa, to produce to produce knowledge. Rather we become producers of knowledge than consumers of knowledge. And there's lots of knowledge that Muslims have produced, and it's up to us to unearth all of that knowledge. And these scholars, and we, by the way, we've been through a rigorous process of actually selecting these scholars. And there were a number of academics that actually went through, academics, ulama, that went through all the abstracts and that gave ratings to all of these abstracts. And, abstracts meaning the summaries of what they were going to be talking about. So in that way, we are able to ensure that we're going to be presenting a good quality conference, inshallah, with good quality speakers and with good content as well, inshallah.
Well, inshallah, and as you mentioned, this is taking place over a 3-day period as well, but obviously covering a whole host of issues. You spoke about governance, you spoke about leadership, we spoke about political legacy, we speak about business, economic, social justice. These are all aspects that are so important that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam actually stood for, and particularly in the world that we are living in. Sadly, all these things are actually lacking, whether we're looking at leadership, whether we're looking at economic justice, social justice, all of it is lacking. And on the receiving end, to a large extent, has been the global south, of which the African continent is a large part of as well. So I suppose, with the academics, with the speakers that you will be having, they will be covering a lot of this, which will obviously provide much needed food for thought in terms of how we think along these themes, how we think along topics like leadership, like governance, and social and political justice.
Yeah, if one looks at most of what we learn is more about our rituals, which is very important. Our salah, our fasting, and the Hajj, the zakah, tawheed in its literal sense, but we don't sort of see tawheed in its absolute implementation. And that is the model of the Prophet ﷺ, who actually was the epitome of that legacy and of that tawheedi culture that he promoted and he represents in all the literature that we find, in the practices that we find, in the social justice issues that we find, whether in Africa, even up to very, very recently, when people like Imam Harun, people like Usman Danfodio in Nigeria, or Umar Mukhtar, all these struggle heroes were people that followed the model of the Prophet ﷺ in opposing colonialism, in opposing domination, in seeking self-determination, and seeking that Islamic identity all the time. So, and of course, liberation, because we cannot survive without that liberation and the freedom of religion and freedom of culture and language and all of that we now find ourselves so much fighting against, actually. So I think that that legacy that we talk about is quite significant in all these different facets, whether in business, whether even in poetry, even in cultural matters like singing the praises of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's so much of so rich culture that we have in Africa. You go to any African country and you'll find groups of people singing in the praise of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we'd like to learn more about it. And hopefully, we'll have some cultural representations of it as well from people at this particular conference.
Well, inshallah, we certainly will, and I'm sure it's going to be a huge success, Zainul Abedin. Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Just very quickly, as far as the conference is concerned, is it open to everyone? What do people need to do if they want to be part and parcel of this conference?
Okay, so first of all, the conference is taking place on the 12th, 13th, and 14th of September, which is next weekend. And this is going to be held at the Kirstenbosch Gardens in Cape Town, South Africa. So that's basically the venue and the dates. Regarding speakers, well, we've got a number of speakers coming in from different parts of the world. You're seeing that on your screen at the moment. Our own local speakers, as well as speakers from abroad, from Africa, from Nigeria, from Turkey, and other countries. And then, of course, you can register via Quicket. There's a registration form on our website. One could go there. And then the fees for the conference is basically 900 rands, which is really just to cover some basic costs. It's not really even there's no profit motive in this whole venture. It's all fi sabilillah, but there are certain costs, and so there's a small cost. Of course, people coming from elsewhere will obviously need travel and accommodation if they want to come there. But we would like to encourage people from all over South Africa, Southern Africa, and the outside world to come in your numbers, because this is really a very, very unique event. It may never happen again in the next 1500 years. So we urge everyone to try their best to come and listen to all these wonderful speakers that we have. And there's approximately 30 odd speakers. So it's going to be really, really jam-packed with very high quality content and high quality speakers as well. So
Well, well, Jazakallah khairan so much for that, and also for taking time out, inshallah. We hope it all goes well, inshallah, and more importantly, as far as attendance is concerned as well, we will continue promoting that as well. But for now, we thank you. Have yourself a wonderful Jummah as well, Zainul Abidin. Jazakallah so much for your time.
Jazakallah and Jummah Mubarak to everyone. Assalamu alaikum
Ameen.
wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Zeinoul Abedin Cajee joining us. The fourth international conference on Islamic civilization in South Africa, in Southern Africa, and really, it's a moment to be not to be missed. In a conference not to be missed, really. And as Zeinoul Abedin mentioned, that this is so unique. It's like a once in a lifetime opportunity, and all of this taking place in this beautiful month of Rabiul Awwal, very, very relevant. And because this is also the representation of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in terms of a whole host of themes that will be discussed, and many of these scholars, academics, are from our very own African continent. With that, we're going to go for a quick break. We'll come back, a quick update on the Abir Zayad tour to South Africa. She arrived in Cape Town yesterday, and after that, obviously, we will be signing off.